Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're going to discover what really happens after Anna's first day of preschool, when James finally finds a true family with Miss Diep and the girls. Just as quiet phone calls and cold emails hint that his powerful father is coming back. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. Sometimes, in the thin hour before dawn, the sound came back so clearly that Miss Diep had to sit up to make sure she was not still there. Beep, beep, beep. In her memory, she was back in the wheelchair, frozen in the NICU hallway. Red numbers on a monitor slid the wrong way. Doctors moved quickly around a plastic box that was somehow her baby. Someone said, "These next hours are critical." And James, kneeling in front of her so she would look at him instead of the screen, had said quietly, "If she dies, I'll sit on this floor with you until we find the next breath. If she lives, I'll be there every night you get up to check her breathing." Anna had lived. Weeks later, when Dr. Harper finally used the word stable, and a nurse said, "You can take her home," Miss Diep had walked through the hospital doors with stitches pulling and fear screaming that someone would stop them. No one did. They stepped into the cold air, and somehow, without really believing it, began a new life. 3 years passed, not in a rush, but in little pieces. There were inhalers and humidifiers, fevers that sent them to the ER faster than other parents. Long nights of counting the rise and fall of a tiny chest. There were also first steps, first words, and Anna's fierce little voice yelling, "Again," when stories ended. Through all of it, James stayed. He learned the names of the nurses on the pediatric floor. He bought cheap coffee and sat in waiting rooms without checking his phone. He showed up for birthdays with cakes that leaned and candles that refused to blow out. He listened when Nee whispered her fear that if Mom smiles too big, something bad always comes. And slowly, the hospital visits faded into the background. The pulse oximeter moved from the nightstand to a drawer. Anna's lungs did their job more often than not. Now, on a soft autumn morning, a different sound woke Miss Diep. Laughter. She opened her eyes to see Nye and Anna already sitting cross-legged on the mattress beside her, a picture book open between them. "That one is A," Anna said, tapping the page with serious concentration. "A for Anna." Nye shook her head. "That's M. A looks like a little mountain." Anna thought about it, then nodded. "Okay, I like mountains." Miss Diep lay still for a moment, just listening. No alarms, no machines, just her daughters breathing the same ordinary air. "Good morning," she said. Anna bounced over and crawled into her lap like she was still small enough to fit there easily. "Mom, is it today?" she asked. "Is what today?" Miss Diep asked, though she already knew. "School day," Anna said. "You said when I am 3.5 I can go to school. I am 3.5. Nye measured me." Nye nodded very seriously. "She's taller than the table now, on the inside." Miss Diep smiled, even as something in her chest tightened. "Yes," she said. "Today is school." The word felt heavy and bright at the same time. In the kitchen, the old kettle rattled on the stove. The same photo always sat by the salt jar. Baby Anna under NICU lights, wrapped in wires. Ms. Diep in a thin gown, eyes full of exhaustion and stubbornness. Nye pressed close. James at the edge of the frame, as if someone had tugged him into the picture, and he hadn't yet realized he belonged there. On the table lay a neat stack of preschool forms. Child's name, Anna medical history, premature birth, NICU stay, lungs sensitive in cold weather. Further down, father's name, James' relationship to child, guardian. The first time she wrote it, her hand had trembled. She had said, "On paper, this is a big thing." James had answered, "In my heart. I decided this the night I watched her fight for breath. The paper is just trying to keep up." Now he stood at the stove, sleeves rolled up, making scrambled eggs like a man who had been in this kitchen 1,000 mornings. "You're early," Miss Diep said. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted. "I kept dreaming I was the one starting preschool, and they made me sit in a tiny chair." "You would break it," Nye said, padding in and grabbing a plate. Anna climbed up next to her, legs swinging. "James," she asked, "do they have crayons at school?" "They'd better," he said. "If not, we'll file a protest." "What's protest?" Anna asked. "That's when grown-ups throw a fit because something isn't fair," Nye explained. "Like when Mom cries over forms." "I do not cry over forms," Miss Diep said. Then she glanced at the paper stack and added, "Not every time." James looked at the forms, then at her. "Are you still okay with this?" he asked quietly, nodding at the line with his name. She followed his gaze. In the hospital, she had signed things she didn't understand because not signing meant losing Anna. Those signatures had been made with shaking hands and a heart full of fear. This one felt different. "In this house," she said, "when something goes wrong, you are the one they run to after me. That's what a father is, James. Not just blood, the person who stays." His expression softened. "Then I'll keep staying," he said. "Paper or no paper?" Anna chewed her eggs, watching them. "Will you stay with me at school?" she asked. "Or do I go alone?" "I'll go in with you," Mrs. Diep said. "I'll meet your teacher, see your cubby, help you hang your backpack. Then I'll come back when class is over." "And me," James said. "I'll be waiting by the door when you come out." "And me," Nye added. "I walk you to the classroom, then I go catch my bus like a very responsible, almost 10-year-old. Anna swallowed and set down her fork. "I'm a little bit scared," she confessed. The honesty in her voice cut straight through Ms. Diep. "When I was your age," she said slowly, "my mother woke me up and said, 'Don't embarrass us.' Then she sent me out with a bag and no hug." "What's embarrass?" Anna asked. "It means don't make me look bad for loving you," Nye said quietly. James watched Miss Diep, saying nothing. She looked at Anna, really looked, at the still small chest that rose and fell without wires, at the eyes that had seen too much hospital light in their first days and still somehow shone bright. "You can be scared and still be brave," Ms. Diep said. "You don't have to impress anybody. You are already more than enough to embarrass this whole family." "Hey," James said. Nye laughed. "She means we love you so much we might cry at the door. That's embarrassing," Anna thought, then nodded. "Okay," she said. "I think I can go." The preschool sat on a corner lot with a low fence and flowers painted on the walls. Inside the gate, children ran in small circles. Parents bent to tie shoes. A silver-haired grandmother held a toddler's hand and patted a young mother's shoulder, as if she'd done it 1,000 times. For a moment, standing on the sidewalk, Miss Diep felt that old glass come down between her and the world. On one side, people who knew how to do this. On the other, a woman who still flinched when she heard beeping in a TV show. "Breathe," James murmured beside her. "This is not the hospital. No one here wants to take her away." "I know," she said. "My heart hasn't learned it yet." They walked in together. The sunflower room had a paper sun on the door. Inside, there were tiny tables, a rug with letters, shelves of books and blocks. A woman with a sunflower pin and kind eyes knelt in front of Anna. "You must be Anna," she said. "I'm Miss Carter. I like your shoes." Anna pressed closer to Miss Diep but whispered, "Thank you." "I'm Miss Diep," she said. "This is James, and this is Nye." "We're happy you're here," Ms. Carter said. "You can stay for a few minutes, then we'll start our morning." On the wall above a row of hooks, names were printed in neat black letters. Amelia, Ben, Dylan, Anna. The sight made Miss Diep's eyes sting. Once, Anna's name had been written on a NICU board next to Weight and Risk. Now it stood alone. No numbers, just a place on a wall. "That's yours," she whispered. "Your spot." Anna shoved her backpack into the cubby with both hands, claiming it like territory. Beside the name, a small frame held their hospital photo. It wasn't beautiful. Ms. Diep's hair was messy. James looked uncertain. The lighting was harsh, but all four of them were in it. "That's us," James said softly. "So proof the worst night wasn't the last chapter." Ms. Carter clapped her hands. "Okay, sunflowers, time to say goodbye to our grown-ups and hello to our song." The words pressed against old scars in Ms. Diep's chest. Her mind flashed back to nurses saying, "We need you to step back now." Anna's small hand caught hers. "Are you going to leave now?" she asked. "In a minute," Ms. Diep said. She knelt, slowly, careful of the old wound, and cupped Anna's cheek. "I'm going to go drink terrible coffee with James and think about you every second. Then I'll be right outside when class is over. I promise." James crouched next to them. "And if Mom gets too worried," he said, "I'll make her walk around the block instead of breaking down the door." Anna giggled. "Don't break my school, Mom." "I will try," Ms. Diep said. Nye hugged her sister, whispering in her ear. Anna nodded, face serious. "What did you tell her?" James asked. "I told her she doesn't have to make the whole room like her," Nye said. "Just find one nice kid and sit next to them. That's enough for a first day." "That's very wise." He smiled faintly. "You sound like someone's grandma." "I live with Mom," Nye said. "I hear things." Miss Carter started the song. Children clapped, a little out of time. Anna took a breath, stepped away from Ms. Diep's hand, and walked to the rug. Halfway there, she turned. 3 faces waited by the door. A mother who had sat through the longest night of her life. A man who had chosen to stay when it would have been easier to go. A sister who had prayed over a plastic box. Anna smiled, a small, brave curve, and sat down on a blue square. Only when she began to clap did Miss Diep let James guide her into the hallway. The door closed with a soft click. "I just left my heart on that rug," she said quietly. "I know," James replied. He looked through the little window where Anna's head bobbed with the song. "We'll stand here and watch the door until it comes back out." For the first time, the echo of NICU beeps in Ms. Diep's memory was softer than the sound of her daughter's laughter on the other side of the wall. It wasn't that the storm had never happened. It was that, somehow, they were still here, watching a little girl in star socks sing a hello song, breathing on her own. The first thing Anna did when they got home was kick off her shoes and throw herself onto the couch. "The rug at school is softer," she announced, "but this one smells like popcorn. I like both." Nye dropped her backpack and flopped down beside her. "Tell me everything," she said. "Did anyone eat glue? Did anyone cry like a goat? I need details." Anna frowned in concentration, legs swinging. "Zoe cried," she said. "But quiet cry, like rain. I gave her my crayon, then she didn't cry. Miss Carter sang a song about washing hands, and I didn't eat glue. That's character development, James said from the kitchen doorway, carrying a tray with fruit and biscuits. I'm proud already. Ms. Diep watched them for a moment. The easy banter, the crumbs on the floor, the way James set the tray down like he'd been doing it his whole life. For a few sweet minutes, everything was simple. Anna talking with her whole body, Nee quoting Big Kid School as if it were a faraway land, James listening with his head tilted, genuinely interested. I drew mountains, Anna continued. I said A is for Anna and also for mountain. Zoe said no, but I like both, so I decided it's both. That's how language works in this house, Nye said. Words can be two things at once. Like family, Ms. Diep thought, like father. She caught James's eye over the girls' heads. He gave her a small smile that said, You see this? We did this. Together. For women watching at home, it would be one of those quiet scenes that made them think of their own living rooms, their own grandchildren climbing onto their laps. But the camera wouldn't stay there forever. Nap time came and went. The afternoon light shifted on the walls. Anna, exhausted from being brave all morning, fell asleep halfway through a cartoon, thumb in her mouth, hair wild. Nye retreated to her room with a book and a promise to totally, definitely, absolutely not fall asleep, and was snoring in 10 minutes. The apartment felt suddenly softer, quieter. James cleared the plates and stood by the sink, sleeves rolled up. You're thinking very loudly, he said without turning around. I'm washing feelings, Miss Diep answered, scrubbing a cup a little too hard. It's not working. He dried his hands and leaned back against the counter. What part is the loudest? He asked. She hesitated. When Anna walked back to the rug and said, I can breathe now, you can go for a little bit, Ms. Diep said. It felt like God sending me an invoice. Here is your miracle. Are you sure you paid enough for it? James frowned. That's not how miracles work. I know, she said. But try telling that to the girl who was married off like a bad bargain, who was told she wanted too much when she wanted a safe home. He crossed the small kitchen and rested his hands lightly on the back of the chair opposite her. Look at me, he said. She did. You are not a bad bargain, Miss Diep, he said. Your ex-husband was a man who didn't understand value. That's different. Your father might agree with him, she said quietly. About me, about you, about this. The word father hung there like a thread pulled from an old wound. James was about to answer when his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, and something in his face changed. Just a flicker, but enough. Unknown number? She asked. Corporate number, he said. From the old life. He let it ring once more, then hit decline. You're not going to answer? She asked. No, he said, too quickly. Then, softer. Not yet. She watched him slip the phone into his pocket like he was tucking away a snake. What if it's important? She asked. His jaw flexed. If it's urgent, they'll email. People like them always want things in writing. He tried to sound casual, but she heard the strain under it. So would the women watching, the ones who knew what it meant when a man pretended something didn't bother him. The email came at dusk. While Ms. Diep folded laundry on the couch, James sat with his laptop at the small table, answering messages about a consulting job. Anna colored on the floor, humming to herself. Nye did homework with the intense focus of a child who loved getting it right. Then James stopped typing. The light from the screen turned his face pale. What is it? Nye asked immediately. You look like when Anna sneezes twice in a row. Nothing, he said. Just work. Adult nothing usually means something, she said. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he closed the laptop halfway, as if he could shut the words inside. It's from the lawyers, he said finally. From my father's side. The room seemed to tighten around them. About the river? Miss Diep asked. About everything, James said. They're restructuring assets. That's fancy language for making sure I know what I'm not getting. Are they taking something from you? Nye asked. Depends how you look at it, he said. Shares, future control, invitations to rooms I don't want to be in anymore. Anna looked up from her drawing. Does it mean you have to go away? She asked. No, James said quickly. It means the opposite. It means a door is closing behind me. He tried to turn it into a joke. Your mom's viewers will be pleased, he added. The bad father is cutting his own rope. They can write good riddance in the comments. But Ms. Diep saw the tremor in his hand as he pushed the laptop aside. He had walked away from that world, yes, but being told officially that you no longer belonged, the legal version of "you're not my son," left a mark. Does he know where we live? She asked quietly. James hesitated. He knows the city, he said. I never told him the address, but if he wants to find me, he can. Men like him never really lose track of things they consider theirs. Even the way he said it, things, made her shiver. There it was, a hint of the storm gathering at the edge of their safe, messy little apartment. Older women in the audience would feel it too. They had seen this pattern before. An ex-husband, an ex-boss, a father-in-law who had cut someone off, then circled back when control slipped. Anna crawled into his lap without asking, as if she sensed the drop in his voice. You're our James, she said firmly, not theirs. He wrapped his arms around her. I know, he said. That's why I'm not afraid to lose what they're dangling. I'm just sad it had to be this way. After the girls were asleep, the apartment felt different. The street noise faded. The hum of the fridge seemed louder. On the table, James's phone buzzed again, screen lighting up. Same corporate number. He stared at it. You can answer, Miss Diep said from the doorway. If you need to. I don't need to, he said. That's new for me. They let it ring out. A voicemail icon appeared. Are you going to listen? She asked. Not yet, he replied. I want one quiet night before I open that door. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. I don't want this world touching them, he added. The girls, you, lawyers, threats, polite cruelty. They survived NICU and village gossip. They deserve better villains than my father. You can't control who knocks, she said gently. Only who you let in. He looked at her, at the old scar that still tugged under her shirt, at the worry that never fully left her eyes. What about you? He asked. If he comes back, if my father pushes again, what do you want to do? For a moment, Ms. Diep saw it like a scene from one of her own videos. A dark car at the curb, an expensive coat at her door, a man who thought his money could rearrange her life. Once, she would have shrunk, apologized for taking up space. Now she thought of Anna in her star socks, telling a powerful man, that's a bad sentence. She thought of Nye muttering, you picked a stupid sentence about you're not my son. She walked to the table and sat across from James. If he wants to see you, she said slowly, I won't stop you. He is your father. That's a wound I can't pretend to understand. She met his eyes, steady. But if he comes here to tell you we are not worth it, or to use the girls to pull you back into his world, then I will be the one your viewers write comments about. He frowned. What does that mean? It means I will not be polite, she said. I will not be quiet. I will tell him that this little apartment and our cracked table and our 2 noisy girls are more of a family than his big house ever was. A small smile tugged at his mouth. I would pay to see that, he said. You won't have to, she replied. He will come for free. They both fell silent at that truth, because that was the hint, the shadow, the thing older women watching would recognize. Men like James's father did not let go quietly. They circled, they tested fences, they sent letters and left voicemails and waited for the right moment to appear. On the counter, the preschool artwork Anna had brought home fluttered in the draft from the window. Red mountains, a shaky blue sun, 4 stick figures holding hands. James looked at it, then back at Ms. Diep. Whatever he's planning, he said, I'm not leaving this picture. We won't let you, she answered. Outside, a car slowed at the corner and then kept going. Just ordinary traffic, or something else. The audience wouldn't know yet. Neither did Ms. Diep. But as she turned off the kitchen light and checked on the girls, one thing was sure. The storm that had once been just a memory was shifting again, far away in boardrooms and cold offices. And somewhere in that storm, a man who had once said, "You're not my son," had just learned his son had put his name on a new kind of family. He would not stay away forever. The hints were there. Cold emails, unanswered calls, the weight in James's shoulders. The question now was not if he would return, but how, and whether the little family around that cracked table was strong enough to stand when he finally stepped back into their story. Single mom. Ms. Diep still carries the echo of NICU beeps in her chest, even as little Anna now walks into preschool on her own 2 feet. On Anna's first school day, James stands quietly beside them, his name written as father on the forms, while big sister Nee shares her one nice kid rule so Anna can be scared and brave at the same time. At home, life turns soft and ordinary. Crumbs on the floor, crayons, star socks, a cracked table, and gentle jokes that make the girls giggle. But unknown calls from a corporate number, cold emails from lawyers, and talk of restructuring assets hint that James's powerful father, the man who once said, "You're not my son," is circling back. Will this fragile happiness stay peaceful or be tested again?